Hey everyone, welcome into Tales from the Vault. Today, we are going to be traveling to Morristown, Tennessee, in eastern Tennessee. So today, we are going to be traveling into the small community in East Tennessee, a small town called Morristown, Tennessee. I live not too far from that place. So this is going to be what happened in 1980 about an unaliving and an attempted unaliving of two teenage girls at a park there. And it is called Predator in the Woods. Morristown, Tennessee, a small town in Hamilton County in northeast Tennessee, about 230 miles east of Nashville. This community is a picturesque slice of small town America, and one of the last places you would expect a savage attack on two teenage girls, and that made what happened to Mitzi Sizemore and Mary Jones even more shocking. The disturbing case put investigators in a race against time to catch a sadistic predator and bring justice to their heartbroken loved ones. July the 20th, 1980, around 3 p.m. on a clear summer day, when a then 33-year-old Jerry Barnard was sitting on his patio to get some fresh air. The chaotic moments that followed will forever remain etched in his memory. I heard screaming, got out my binoculars, then looked over there and saw a person coming out of the woods. I thought it was an escaped prisoner. Jerry said. Jerry was stunned. It was a badly injured teenage girl with a pair of handcuffs dangling from her wrist. Jerry called to his neighbor to get help while he headed out to the woods, armed with a weapon. As I came this way, I saw someone lying there on the edge of the woods. She opened her eyes and said, "I've been stabbed." Jerry said the teenager was near passing and struggling to breathe. She told Jerry her name was Mitzi and a man had just tried to unalive her. And I said, "Let me get out of here." So I carried her back over right there to my house, Jerry recalls. As Jerry picked the young woman up into his arms, she whispered another horrifying comment. She said her best friend, Mary Jones, was still in the woods with a man who had attacked her. While an ambulance raced Mitzi to the hospital, police and jury headed into the woods to see if they could save her friend Mary. But when they found the teenager, it was already too late. I can remember it like it was yesterday. The young teenage girl, she has at least 3 stab wounds that I can see, said lead detective Martin Coffey. The evidence police discovered in the woods revealed a nightmare most couldn't imagine. Detective Esco Jarnigan, who later became sheriff, said there was no way to prepare yourself for what they saw. I worked probably 1,000 crime scenes, but this one still haunts me, said Jarnigan, describing what he saw. She was nude. She had 4 distinct stab wounds, and the 4th was in the neck, said Jarnigan. You could tell the weapon had been twisted like it was meant to unalive her, he continued. As investigators searched the crime scene surrounding Mary Jones' lifeless body, a grim picture of her last moments began to quickly come into focus. They had discovered her shorts, maybe 30 yards from there, up across the fence, said Coffey. It appeared Mary had tried to escape from her attacker. That's what's going through my mind as I seen part of her clothing pulled up over the top of her head, part of her clothing in another area of the crime scene. This really looks like an SA unaliving case, said Coffey, one in which the victim fought desperately for her life. Police fanned out, looking for the assailant. There was an intense search for the perpetrator. At the time of day was probably 6:30 or 7 p.m. We had about a couple of hours left of daylight, said Coffey. But the search didn't turn up anything. They found no signs of Mary's assailant. Still, lead detective Martin Coffey hoped there was something in the woods that might lead to the identity of the suspect. The weapon was not at the crime scene at the moment, said Coffey, so detectives found no other evidence that would connect Mary's attacker to the savage attack. Police believed they would need a medical miracle to move their investigation forward. There was a real concern that Mitzi would not survive. She had multiple wounds and they were in the chest, recalls Coffey. She wasn't expected to survive, said Jarnigan. She had lost a lot of blood. It was just touch and go, said Jarnigan. While everyone on the case prayed for Mitzi, detectives also had to prepare for the task of notifying Mary's family about what happened to their loved one. Mitzi Sizemore was battling for her life in the hospital after being brutally attacked. She had somehow escaped after being handcuffed into a tree and left for deceased. Detectives, hoping that she would survive and could tell them what had happened. Mitzi's best friend, Mary Jones, having lost her life to the same attacker. Investigators now had to break the heartbreaking news to her loved ones. Well, the phone rang, and I answered it, and a man said, "Is your sister Mary Jones?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, she's been unalived," said Mary's sister Patty. I remember screaming, and I asked him what had happened, and he said she was stabbed to her demise, said Patty. Mary's family went to the hospital to then identify the body. My uncle identified her, Patty said. My parents couldn't do it because they were just way too upset. Then my uncle said he would do it, so he identified her, and he was forever changed. He never was the same after he saw her, she recalls. J.D. Jones, Mary Jones' brother, recalls, "I was young, 8 years old, not knowing what was going on. I just knew she was gone." Mary was real sweet. She was the peacemaker in our family. She was just a good little sister, said Patty. I know she wanted to be a mom. She wanted her own family, she recalls. Mary's sister Loretta said, "I had no clue who could have done something so horrible. I mean, why? Why would anybody want to hurt her? There was little to go on until the autopsy results came in. She was victimized as an SA," said Coffey. A small amount of DNA was recovered. DNA was probably the most blissful thing that has ever been incorporated in law enforcement, said Jernigan. But that was prior to that. At the time, we could see that this is going to be a difficult case to solve, he continues. At the crime scene, investigators were still searching for clues that would lead them to Mary's attacker. This is the area where we found some fiber on the fence that used to be here, said Jernigan. It was just a strand of fiber, like something off a pair of pants, said Coffey. I believe it's something we need to preserve, said Coffey. The strand of cloth helped police patch together what they believed happened. I think he takes off her shorts, and at that point she somehow gets away from him, and she gets across the fence, and she's running, said Jernigan. They believe her attacker chased after her, catching his pants on the top of the fence as he climbed over it. The fence separated the woods from the roadway where Mary could have gotten help, but she never made it. He manages to chase her down, being faster than her, and then he wounded her 4 times, unaliving her, Coffey relates. The number of wounds, the means which he partially unclothed her, lots of indicators of how to degrade her, he said. It was difficult for investigators to contain their emotions, to know just how close she had come to reaching safety. As detectives made their way back from the crime scene, they got good news from the hospital. Mitzi survived surgery and was ready to talk. Doctor said it had been a miracle she had even survived surgery. They were concerned that the trauma she had suffered might affect what she could remember. We were extremely relieved that not only did she survive, but that she could talk to us, said Coffey. We knew we only had a few minutes and didn't know what she might actually know, especially in regards to her close friend who was already deceased, and we didn't want to give her that information to her. So we walked in and we let her tell her story as she was able to tell us, said Coffey. She talked about how her attacker had stopped along the road, saying he was a police officer and he was looking for 2 runaways, said Coffey. She explained how a man claiming to be a police officer approached her and Mary on their way to a local park. 40 years later, Mitzi recounts those terrifying moments in a phone interview. He shows his badge, his identification. He had a weapon on his hip. That's what made us believe he was a police officer. He said he was looking for 2 runaways and told us their names, she recalls. The off-duty officer asked him if they might be able to help him. Mitzi had said she knew them, had gone to school with them, said Coffey. Mary and Mitzi told the man they had not seen the 2 runaways or that they had any idea where they might be. So he drove away. A few hours later, when the teenagers were leaving the park, the man came back. He said he had spotted them and they were camped out. He wanted to know, since we knew them, if we would help talk them out of the woods so he could get them home, said Mitzi. They agreed to help him. He had done his homework, said Jernigan. It was easy to convince him to get into the vehicle. After driving a few miles, he drove to a neighborhood parking lot in an empty cul-de-sac, asking Mitzi to go into the woods with him to talk to the runaway couple. He told Mary to stay there because too many of them might scare the couple off, said Coffey. He said, "Why don't you go and try to talk them out? I'll show you where they're at." As I started, he held down the fence for me to cross over, and as soon as I crossed over that fence, he grabbed me," said Mitzi. The fence she described was the same one they had found fibers on that they believed was the attacker's clothing. Mitzi said once he grabbed her, she knew she would have to fight to survive. I flipped around and started fighting him. I clawed his face, I hit him. I fought him with everything I had in me. I was little. He had a pair of handcuffs, and he handcuffed my left wrist, and he jumped on me, and he held a weapon to my head," said Mitzi. He told her not to scream, but she started screaming anyway. The whole time I was screaming, "Run, Mary, go get help." I was hoping she would hear me. He kept saying, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you." And I said, "Then why are you doing this?" He reached down, unbuttoned, and zipped my shorts. All of a sudden, I saw something silver. He came down with the weapon and wounded my throat. I thought, "Play deceased, Mitzi, play deceased." So I acted like I was choking on my blood because I was bleeding pretty bad, recalls Mitzi. He then said, "You've had it," and he wounds her in the chest, collapsing one of her lungs. Just then her attacker was distracted by a noise in the woods behind him. Mary Jones was watching him from a distance. Before he took off running, he reached and handcuffed my other hand around a tree. I couldn't believe what was happening. Here we were. Thought we were helping an officer. Now, I'm laying here handcuffed to a tree, my throat wounded, said Mitzi. Mary had crossed over the fence, and he, at some point, took off after Mary, said Jernigan. Mitzi is hearing someone scream. I don't know if she is really able to realize at that moment if it's Mary, said Coffee. Mitzi knew she was about to expire and desperately tried to free herself from the handcuffs before she lost consciousness. She knew she had a moment that she could try and get her hands out of the handcuffs. I'm trying to get the handcuff off of my left hand, and it was just way too tight. And I worked and worked and worked until with the handcuff on my right wrist and finally got it off, said Mitzi. Mitzi then stumbled through the forest, praying for help. Something told me, it's not your time, Mitzi, it's not your time. You're going to have to fight to live, said Mitzi. She ran through the woods down into a field, screaming. She then hears someone coming up and thinks it's her attacker returning to finish her off. Turns out it was the neighbor who had seen her. He's my guardian angel. God brought him out there. It was a miracle, said Mitzi. Not only had Mitzi struggled with her attacker, break free, get down into the field, which was an incredible feat itself, but she was able to go through such details was crucial. Mitzi wasn't done. She remembered a lot and described her attacker. He had strawberry blonde hair, him build, big old bug eyes. His eyes is what I remember so well, bugged out of his head. I looked him face to face, fighting with him and pleading for him to stop doing what he was doing. His eyes, I see them every day. I close my eyes and I see his face, said Mitzi. Mitzi also remembered the truck he had been driving. It was a yellow pickup and it had fishing rods in the back, she recalls. The details of the story led police to a chilling conclusion. The man was a member of their community with law enforcement training and was likely someone on the hunt for his next victim. No young girl in the town was safe until he was brought to justice. We were hopeful her description of the truck would lead to a suspect, but turns out there's a lot more yellow trucks in the county than we imagined. We had officers most of the night chasing down yellow trucks, said Coffee. Until the suspect was caught, the small, tightly knit community was living in terror. Oh, the fear was very significant because you just don't have that sort of thing happen here, said Coffee. At the time, we were able to release a lot of information to the press pretty quickly, and the local radio station was broadcasting it continually, said Coffee. The most important tip we got was a call about the runaways, and we were able to go and find them. That was crucial, said Coffee. Detective Coffee asked the runaways if they knew anyone that matched Mitzi's attacker. The person that had the most information was the young man, and it was all over the news, and he said he thought he knew 2 people that met the description, and only one has a yellow pickup truck. He gave them a name. He wasn't anywhere on the radar. Randy May. a friend who had worked at a nearby service station. When the detectives delved into his background, the lead only got more promising. He had applied for jobs in law enforcement in numerous places. May was studying part-time for a degree in criminal justice at a local community college. That would have given him insight how to impersonate an officer. Detective Coffey and his partner headed to May's home to question him. They knocked at the door. His wife was home and said he was at work. But as they were backing out, leaving the residence, they saw a small yellow truck there. When they tracked him down at work, his hair color was another piece of the puzzle. He has the same strawberry blonde hair. They asked him if he would care to spend a few minutes with them at the sheriff's department. He was surprisingly calm, talking quite a bit. May told them that on that afternoon of Mary's passing, he had actually been fishing in the area where the girls were approached by a man in a yellow truck. May claimed something very strange had happened. How he takes his truck to the lake and somehow leaves his keys in the vehicle. He says it took several hours for him to realize that someone had been inside the truck. He goes home, mows his lawn, and washes his truck. He then comes to the sheriff's department to report that someone had tampered with his truck. He claimed his truck was taken by a thief who stole several items that afternoon. Because the suspect returned the truck, he hadn't realized it until after he washed the truck. He's missing his knife, and a few other things are missing, and doesn't know what happened to them. Detective Coffey was stunned. It appeared May was trying to explain away evidence that would connect him to the crime. Bells and whistles were going off. They checked into his story. They found no record he had visited the sheriff's office that day, nor any report filled out about stolen items. May couldn't even provide the name of the deputy to confirm it. They didn't have enough evidence to arrest him at that point, so they needed him to talk. They still needed Mays to allow them to search his home, but they had to avoid tipping Mays off about their suspicions. They asked him if they could take a look at his house. He agreed. He was even helpful in the search. They asked Mays if he owned a weapon. He takes them to the back bedroom and pulls a .45 out from between the mattress and box springs. It was identical to the one Mitzi said her attacker had. They also collected an empty handcuff case. Since he was taking criminal justice classes, Mays wanted to relate to them as fellow cops. After the search was completed, Mays agreed to return to the sheriff's department for answers and additional questions. Detectives began by asking him about the empty handcuff case. His story then changed. He remembered his handcuffs were missing as well. Somebody tampered with his truck. They had taken his handcuff keys and just hadn't realized it. It was time to change the tone, up the ante. It was time to confront him with the facts they had. They pressed him about how each clue connected him to the assaults. Under the barrage of questions, Randy May suddenly cracked. His entire story began to change. He began to tell them what happened. Most of the story he told matched what Mitzi had told them. He admitted he approached the two girls and identified himself as a police officer and to help with the runaways. That statement and evidence stating it was premeditated. As Mays talked about the two young girls, his motive for the attack quickly became obvious. He begins to describe the two young girls talking about Mary's red hair, but he talked much more about Mitzi, about her being really cute. Mitzi was the target of his affection. He then drove them to a remote location where he knew there would be no witnesses. He had to have been there before to case the location. He knew where he was going. He explained how he separated the girls, convincing Mary to wait in the truck, while he took Mitzi into the woods to SA her. He attacks her, but his confession left out the most gruesome detail. He remembered taking Mitzi across the fence, then grabbing her from behind. He remembered the handcuffs, but didn't remember any of the actual assault. During his confession of unaliving Mary, he also claimed he couldn't remember how he ended her life. He remembered cleaning the weapon and leaving the scene. He then led them to his home, where additional evidence was recovered: the badge, the ID holder, the weapon, and the handcuff keys. They already had enough to arrest May, but they knew there was still one piece of the puzzle left to seal the case. They didn't line up with Mitzi at the sheriff's department. When she stepped up to take a look at him, you could actually watch her relive the moment. She picks out May immediately. I was shaking all over. I was scared beyond reason. There was no doubt in my mind it was him. He was the one that attacked me, said Mitzi. At that point, it was obvious the case was over. Mays offered to plead guilty to a lesser offense in exchange for a lesser sentence. Mary's family supported the move. They were grateful it never went to trial at the time, as they were trying to protect their parents from the details. So they were glad he got 30 years without a change of parole. But under Tennessee law, the terms of May's sentence were far different from what was read in the courtroom. Tennessee did not have truth in sentencing. The way the Tennessee Department of Corrections works, he could receive credit for taking classes for good behavior. A life sentence is a percentage of life, and his was 30%. When Mary's family learned of May's actual sentence under the plea deal, they were furious. Just 6 years into his sentence, he had his first change of parole. The family got to work getting petitions signed and forming peaceful protest and a candlelight vigil, a process they had to endure over and over again. It's hard. He sat within 4 feet of me. I could reach out and touch him. Nothing between us, said Mary's sister Patty. It is really hard, a lot of emotions. She said the work to keep Mays in prison consumes us. It takes all of our time. Every time we would finish, we would have to start thinking of what we were going to do the next year, said Patty. It feels like going in, we have to continue to prove that he's guilty. It's exhausting. It's horrible to have to relive it. But I made a vow to Mary, as long as there was breath in me, that I would go, said Mitzi. There's not been a day that has passed since this happened that I haven't thought about it, that I haven't thought about my friend Mary, she continues. During parole hearings, Mitzi recounts what happened to her every single time in vivid detail, never wavering. He said he's going to come back and unalive me. I truly believe if they let him out that he will try to do just that. I'll never have a normal life, said Mitzi. The last parole hearing was in 2023. It was denied due to the seriousness of the crime. So, there is the story of what happened in Morristown, Tennessee. Like I said, I remember when this happened. I live close to there, and I grew up in Sneedville, which is just 45 minutes from there. And we had just left the park that day, actually, and had gotten home and was watching the news and heard about it. So you never know when something like this could happen. So I hope you found this story interesting. I don't know what next week's going to be, but I'm sure, like I said, I've got plenty of research here that I'm going to go through. So don't forget to like, to subscribe, to hit that notification button, and to share this video. And until next time, I'll see ya from Tales from the Vault. Bye.